And welcome, Hoosier fans, to this week's edition of Assembly Call Radio, where each week we discuss the most important IU basketball stories from the past 7 days. This is our 49th edition of Assembly Call Radio, and it is our 341st episode overall of the Assembly Call, recorded on the evening of Thursday, October 19th, 2017. I am your host, Jared Morris. And let's begin this week how we begin every episode of the Assembly Call, and that is with our Hoosier Proud banner moment. So here's a little twist. This week's banner moment hasn't actually happened yet. It will happen, or at least is projected to happen, on Saturday night at Hoosier Hysteria. That is when two five-star prospects from the class of 2018 will be in attendance and on official visits. Darius Garland and a young man from New Albany who you might be familiar with named Romeo. And while the news that Romeo's visit will be an official one rather than an unofficial one isn't earth-shattering, it is encouraging. It's yet another sign of his seriousness about Indiana, and it's one less official visit that he can take to another school. Now, I trust that both Romeo and Darius will receive extremely warm and enthusiastic welcomes from the Hoosier faithful, but they are not the only important prospects who will be in attendance. Let's not forget about the guys from the class of 2018 who are already in the fold. Jerome Hunter, Rob Finnessy, and Demezi Anderson are all expected to be in attendance. And while we're all excited about Romeo and Darius, we certainly shouldn't take these four-star future Hoosiers for granted. And if we look beyond the class of 2018, there will be a number of younger recruits in attendance as well, led by two of the top prospects in the class of 2019, both from Indiana, Keon Brooks and Trace Jackson Davis. So obviously, it's a big night for the future of the program, having that many potential future stars in the building at once. And while we are all looking forward to watching the current Hoosiers scrimmage, and yes, we'll be hosting a live event, a live episode of the Assembly Call immediately following said scrimmage, because we're just that crazy about our IU hoops, nothing that we glean from the scrimmage will really be that important other than everyone avoiding injury. Knock on wood. The real importance of Hoosier Hysteria lies in its ability to get fans hyped up for another season and, more importantly, to show off Hoosier Nation and Simon Skjodt Assembly Hall to recruits and their families, which is why nothing can be more important for the future of Indiana basketball than Romeo, Darius, Keon, Trace, and the rest of the recruits being excited and intrigued by what they see and what they hear on Saturday night. All right, now let me introduce my esteemed co-host for this week's show. Yes, just one co-host, as Ryan is off eating real pizza and gazing at Renaissance art in Italy. But my co-host tonight, he is a man who, in addition to being a world-class bracketologist and analyzer of substitution patterns, is now preparing for yet another season at the helm of his daughter's youth basketball teams. And yes, in case you were wondering, Ryan and I do plan to sit in the stands and heckle him anytime one of his girls misses a defensive rotation or takes an inefficient long two-point jumper, because that's on you, Andy Bottoms. No excuses. We demand accountability.
I don't even know how to react to that. They're first graders. This could really go off the rails quickly if people are heckling them, especially people not related to any of them. I feel like that could really get dicey for you from a personal standpoint.
No, we're heckling you. We're heckling you. Just you.
Oh,
then
that's fine.
We're keeping it away from the girls. Just heckling you. All right, Andy, what is your bottoms line from the last week in IU basketball?
Well, I mean, the first week of practice went well. I've got a team of excited, 9 excited first graders, and then I'm helping with my older daughter's team, so there's 10 of them. But it was a good week. So we're kind of bridging the gap between soccer and basketball season now. So excited to get them out there. But from an IU perspective, I thought about channeling my inner Ryan and ranting about the Big Ten's eventual use of common sense, I believe you would call it, in some of the decisions that were announced today. But I'm sure we'll talk about those later that came out of media day. From an IU perspective, one of the things in the stories that I found interesting was one that Mike Miller had put out, and it was about this, this gold standard, and basically IU awarding a gold jersey to the guy who was most productive in practice. And it sounds like Archie goes through and It says awarding points to players who work during practice, runs through the good and bad moments. By the end of the week, player with the highest tally gets the gold jersey. And so I think just a really cool thing, and hopefully a tradition that will begin. Certainly good news to hear that Devontae Green won the first one. Archie had quite a bit of praise of him, it seemed like, over the course of today, and it seems like he's in the running for it again this week. But I just thought, just in terms of accountability, that's one of the things that we've talked about. And one of the things about this whole gold jersey concept that Archie talked about is, for a coaching staff, it's accountability, ability to answer questions directly on why things may not be as they seem. And really talking about, to me, our best players over the course of time in practice have been the guys that get the job done in games. Sometimes you have what they call a gamer who's a little better in the games than in practice, but usually it's pretty accurate. And it seems like something in a couple of the comments from the guys that they're really embracing, not just because the person who has it doesn't have to run sprints. But Archie, the last line of this was, everything we do, Miller said, is about competition. And that's what you want to see: competition for playing time, competition internally to get better, and all those kinds of things. So I thought it was a really cool thing that, I think we've heard, everybody's been kind of hanging on every word. This was the first that I've heard about him doing that. And it seems like something that's really, got the guys excited. So a cool thing from my perspective. I think that competition and you play how you practice is the old adage. And it seems like that's really what he's trying to hone in on.
Man, I love the gold jersey idea. That is awesome. I feel like we need to lift it somehow, have like a gold cap or something that we wear on the show for whoever had the best point on the previous week's show.
Ryan's feelings would get hurt eventually, though. So
yeah. Yes. Alrighty. So here's what we're going to discuss on the show this week. It is absolutely packed. We're going to start out going over Big Ten Media Day, a few reactions to some of the more notable things that were talked about at Big Ten Media Day. And then we're diving into our front court preview. So much like we did last week with the backcourt, we are really going to go in depth on the front court guys: Juwan Morgan, Geron Davis, Collin Hartman, Freddie McSwain, Tim Priller. Talk about the freshmen. We've got some advanced stats that we want to go over, and I think you'll really get a lot out of this in terms of previewing those guys and what they need to do to take the next step this season. So all of that coming on this episode of Assembly Call Radio. If we have time for questions at the end, we'll get there, but we have so many guys to cover that we might not get a chance to get there. Don't forget, if you ever have to miss all or part of an episode of Assembly Call Radio, there are two great ways to catch up. You can subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, or you can watch the video replay or join our live broadcast by subscribing to our YouTube channel. That is at youtube.com/assemblycall. And this quick reminder, the next time you're looking for tickets to a sporting event or a concert, remember our friends at SeatGeek. You can download their app, which is incredibly convenient and easy to use, or if you just want an easy-to-remember URL that will take you directly to the IU basketball ticket listings on SeatGeek's website, here it is, iutickets.shop. For example, do you want tickets to either of Indiana's 2 exhibition games on October 28th or November 5th? Tickets are available for, last time I checked, as low as $9. Or how about the season opener against Indiana State on November 10th? Tickets are still available for that one too, and you can check out all the latest ticket deals on the SeatGeek app or at that URL, iutickets.shop, and get the best prices available. And if it's your first time using SeatGeek, don't forget the promo code ASSEMBLY. Use it when you make your first purchase, and you will get $20 back after that purchase. Again, the promo code is ASSEMBLY, ASSEMBLY. Alrighty, well, you are listening to the Assembly Call. I'm Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms, my co-host on the Assembly Call IU postgame show. And Andy, let's kind of run through a few more of the more notable items from Big Ten Media Day. Obviously, the confirmation of the 20-game schedule and the protected rivalries was headliner news. The 20-game schedule will start next year. Indiana and Purdue will play twice every season. They are among the 3 protected rivalries, along with Michigan, Michigan State, and Illinois Northwestern. It goes without saying that we are all very much in favor of that. I also thought it was notable that we found out that Collin Hartman kind of turned his ankle. So he may not play Saturday night, but on the bright side, it doesn't sound like it's anything serious. It's nothing to do with the knee, just an ankle, and he should be fine long term. And then, the other note that I thought was really interesting was Archie's quotes about loving the Ken Pomeroy data and how much he really takes pride in seeing how his teams, move up when they have good performances, and how disappointing and it is, and how dejected he feels when his team moves down. He says they check it after every game, kind of like we do on the post-game show. So, Coach, if after the press conference you want to come live on the assembly call and we'll all check the Ken Pom data together, we'd love to have you for those great moments after games. Anything?
Just us sitting here with Archie on, everybody clicking refresh on Ken Pom. That'd be
Ken Pom, right? Yeah.
Hey, you guys, have you guys checked it yet? No. Oh, look, we're up to whatever. That would be outstanding. Radio, video, whatever. It would be terrific.
It would be incredible. Those are kind of my big takeaways. Andy, anything from there that you want to react to, or anything else that we haven't covered yet from Media Day that you thought was notable?
I think the scheduling stuff, and even about the Big Ten tournament being, like 4 out of 5 years being in Indy or Illinois, between that and the 20 games and the protected rivalries, it's like everybody congratulating the Big Ten. I'm like, I refuse to congratulate you on using common sense that everybody has been yelling about for however long, that you need to figure this out and make it work. So, good that they finally have come to their senses on those things. But, I struggle to do that. One of the other things that Delaney talked about in his comments was about that, kind of week off, and with the Big Ten tournament being in New York this year, and kind of how, how that worked, and, didn't think it would hurt anybody. Kind of threw out the 15 other conferences do it. I'm like, well, 15 other conferences aren't one of the top, 6 leagues in the country, and 15 other conferences who do it have, a number of at-large contenders that you can count on one hand. So I thought that was kind of a silly rebuttal to that notion. But the Ken Pom stuff was great. It felt a little bit like the celebrities, they're just like us. It's like, oh, coaches, they're just like us. At least us who are doing the show now, and the 3 weeks before the season really gets started, and doing whatever. So that was cool to see that he embraces that stuff. I would not say that I'm surprised by that based on some of the other things, but I thought that was kind of cool to see him open up. It just so many of the questions have been asked repeatedly, and it was at least an area that we hadn't really gotten his thoughts on. So I thought that was just interesting a little bit to hear him talk about how into that stuff he is and how closely he pays attention to it.
Yeah, and the last interesting note for me was there was an interview that Archie and Rob and Collin did with Dave Revson, and toward the end, Archie had this great quote. He said, Dave Revson kind of asked him, what it had been like adjusting to life in Bloomington, and Archie said, "It's overwhelming how many people live and die with what we do." And I'm just, who's he talking about? What IU fans are so crazy that they live and die with IU basketball?
Weird.
Yeah, Archie, I don't know who you're talking about, Archie, but that is not us, clearly.
But that invite to refresh Ken Pom with us still stands, Archie.
Still stands.
Yeah.
No, but what I loved about it is after that, Archie said, we're obligated to that, to work extremely hard to give them a team that they can be proud of. And I continue to be impressed by Archie's humility, and just how much it really seems to mean to him being at IU, and how much he seems to love that camaraderie of people who just love basketball and are about basketball like he is, which is just another reason to think that it's going to be a really good fit. So, look, I don't think you learn a ton from these Media Day events, but, those were a few interesting nuggets that we found that were interesting. But it is time now to move forward. It is time to talk players. And so coming up on the assembly call, we are going to dive into part 1 of our preview of the IU Frontcourt by discussing Juwan Morgan and Geron Davis. Stick with us. That's coming up next. All right. 13 minutes and 45 seconds. Welcome, everybody who's watching on YouTube. My apologies for my mic being wrong there. The first 5 minutes. Fortunately, I had the right mic selected for the radio recording. Otherwise, we would have had to redo this whole thing.
Good. I did think that sounded a little bit odd there initially, but I was like, maybe I just missing something.
You got to let me know. But someone did, and I got it flipped on. So the first few minutes aren't going to sound good on the YouTube video replay, but I apologize for that. I just had a setting wrong. So anytime you hear anything off like that, please put it in the chat, because there's a lot to keep track of here, and sometimes things get a little messed up. All right, that was 13 minutes and 45 seconds. So we have much time here. We got 12:15 left. So we have 11:58.
Okay.
Okay. So we'll start with Juwan and let's just see how far we get.
Okay.
Hopefully we can get to both of them. But
yeah, I think that's fine because then there's a number to hit there. But yeah, if we have to keep going, it's not a big deal.
Also, OG apparently is having an awesome debut.
Oh, is he? I love the that video they had of him, like in-depth stats.
Yeah, that was awesome.
The Chronic tweeted out like that they're just embracing what he is. I thought that was
as they should.
Hey,
as they should. They're all gonna love OG just like we did.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hopefully they just get to see him play more than we did. That's the thing about OG. Like you think back and there's so few actual basketball memories of him. And so many of them are spectacular, you know? I just wish we had more.
Yeah, that would be better for sure. Yeah, it looks like he's got 9 points in 9 minutes. Based on what I'm looking at.
I mean, they're only playing the Bulls, so that's kind of like doing it against Houston Baptist, but you know,
well,
still, it's a start.
Even in the NBA, there are exhibition games, right? Is that not what this is?
Right.
Okay. I wasn't sure.
Yes.
And according to plus minus, he's a plus 22. So that seems good.
It's about what he was in the North Carolina game last year.
They are up 20 on the Bulls. So, yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah. All right.
Okay. Let's hop in. Let's talk Juwan.
All right.
Here we go. We have, what did I say? We have 11:58.
11:58, I think.
I'll keep you updated in the chat.
Okay.
With where we are. And if I do this, then it means that we need to, time's coming up.
Gotcha.
Okay, here we go.
All right.
You are listening to the Assembly Call. I am Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms, my co-host on the Assembly Call IU postgame show, and it is time to dive into our front court preview for the 2017-18 season. And Andy, let's begin with Juwan Morgan, who is obviously a guy that we all think is extremely important this year. We've seen flashes of his potential during his first 2 seasons in Bloomington. Obviously, injuries have gotten in the way, a little bit of inconsistency at times, but I think we all really feel like if he can stay healthy, improve in certain areas, he can really have a big breakout as a junior. And so, you and I both kind of did a deep dive into some of the advanced analytics. I looked at Synergy Sports. I know you looked at KenPom. And, we kind of came up for all of these guys with areas where they really need to take the next step. And I think what was really interesting with Juwan, Geron, and Collin in particular was areas that they really were very good at last year, and Collin obviously the year before, that they can really build on. And so, my big takeaway to begin here with Juwan Morgan is that he really needs to improve as a shooter, be closer to his freshman year. And if he can do that and maintain his efficiency elsewhere, especially on the offensive end, then what Archie talked about with him having now a responsibility for production, I think he'll have a really good opportunity to fulfill that responsibility for production and be a consistent double-figure type scorer. Look at some of these numbers. So I thought, in looking at these numbers from Synergy, he was surprisingly effective on offense last year. In 233 possessions, he produced 244 points, which was actually in the 90th percentile, which is excellent. And if you isolate that into half-court possessions, in 198 half-court possessions, he was actually in the 95th percentile, but then struggled in transition, as actually a lot of guys did last year, and was actually below average in transition. But where he really, really struggled was as a shooter. Because as a jump shooter in 34 possessions, he scored 26 points, which was 27th in the 27th percentile, which was below average. And if you isolate that down to catch and shoot possessions, where he had 23, he scored just 15 points, which was in the 12th percentile. And if you think back, that was really the big difference between Juwan as a freshman and Juwan as a sophomore is, when he got open looks off of a great pass, he just wasn't able to convert because as a freshman, he was in the 98th percentile nationally in jump shot situations and was even better than that in catch and shoot situations. He was basically off the charts. And so, if he can improve those numbers and become, even just get back to average and then maintain his efficiency in the other areas. He was great around the basket in the 93rd percentile, scoring around the basket in non-post-up situations. In isolation possessions, he was in the 97th percentile. I mean, you think about the many times that he had his man at the top of the key and just drove to the basket and scored. He was really good in those situations. And so if he can keep that and then improve his shooting, I think Juwan really, of all the guys on the team, I think, has the potential to really take another leap offensively, become a guy who can score 12, 13 points a game consistently if those jump shots are falling. Andy, what do you see in terms of Juwan, in terms of his strengths that he's bringing to the table and what he really needs to improve on to take the next step?
Yeah, it's interesting to take what you found in synergy and just contrast it with some of the more simplistic is probably the wrong way to put it, but the more kind of basic things that in KenPom. But so the one thing I think we kind of know what he is from a rebounding perspective, his defensive rebounding percentage is almost identical as a freshman and a sophomore. So I think that's one area exactly what you're going to get. He was one of few guys whose turnover percentage got better year over year, dropped quite a bit, I think from about 25 to about 17, or 23 to 17. So I think you have a guy who's going to take pretty good care of the ball, and he shot really well on 2-point shots. So 65% on twos, did struggle to shoot from three, was just 10 of 40 there. And so I think those are all, good things to build on. We know he can finish around the basket. The stats that you talked about really back that part of it up. The other thing that I noticed that you didn't touch on there was free throw rate. One of the constant refrains that we had last week talking about the guards was that we didn't have guys that could get to the line. We actually found that's not as true at all with the front court players. Juwan's free throw rate was 56, which is pretty high. It shot 74%, so did well when he got there. That dropped in Big Ten games. I think partly because that was a time that he was injured and really just wasn't as explosive, wasn't able to really get around guys. But I think he is an efficient player, ranked 83rd nationally. And what I saw in, offensive rating at 122, and even against, it was 120 against, tier A competition, the way that, KenPom defines that, either by the quality of the team in combination with the venue, and was almost a 111 against even conference competition. So, we've seen that he can do that. We talk about some of these guys and those numbers drop off pretty dramatically. And you see how much some of the schedules of past years have really allowed guys to, kind of pad stats or look better than they might really be. His don't show that at all. I mean, he's continued to be efficient against competition. Now the question becomes, can he step that up as more of a focal point of the offense where he's easily been a complementary piece these last couple of years? And I think that ultimately for me is the shooting that you mentioned is part of that, but it's really just how comfortable is he, that responsibility of production, those kinds of things. I mean, that's a big leap when we start thinking about, usage rates and how many possessions that he's really a key part of. So that, from my perspective, is really the key. And I think he can do it because, he's got some of these foundational skills that we talked about that he can just build on and go from there. But definitely going to be, and needs to be, a different Juwan Morgan than what we've seen in some ways these last couple of years.
And you bring up a great point, because he's never been at the top of the scouting report. I mean, even last year, he was typically maybe at best, the third option on offense, but a lot of times, fourth or fifth option, especially his freshman year when those efficiency numbers looked so good. And so he's going to have to deal with that and deal with more attention and deal with better defenders being on him. And if he's ready to do that, and I think being able to shoot will really help him, because then, when he does get the ball at the top of the key, or on the wing, guys may not be able to play right up on him, and that'll give him some space to move. Whereas if he's not, making shots, that's not going to be the case. And so if he can do that and really have that varied offensive game, he's really got a chance to take that next step. Now, the other thing that he's got to do is play well defensively. And I thought it was interesting that he, we know he has the skills to be a good defender, and we've seen him be a good defender. He actually graded out as poor overall, according to the synergy numbers, and was poor or below average in everything but his defense in post-up situations, which was excellent. Now, it was only 21 situations, but he did a very good job there, and that's actually a theme that we're going to see, because Geron Davis also did a pretty decent job in post-up situations, and that's going to be important, obviously, with Indiana not having a tremendous amount of depth down low for those guys to be able to defend the post well. But Juwan, look, I think just being in a better defensive system, being on a team that pays more attention defensively, I think is going to help everybody's defensive numbers, because I think everybody was kind of, pulled down by each other and by the bad scheme last year. So anything else on Juwan before we move on?
No, I was surprised by the defense. I think just because he's a guy that we see as being so versatile, but I guess it might be one of those things that, when multiple bad apples spoil the whole bunch at that point, everybody is kind of drugged down by that. I do think, this goes back to some of the other conversations we've had in the offseason in terms of importance of certain guys. I think it's really hard to understate the importance that he has for the team, because I think he has a combination of skills and a versatility that there really is no obvious replacement for if he should get hurt again, if he should struggle. There isn't another guy that you'd kind of lump into him. And probably say the same thing about Geron when we talk about him. But just as you start thinking about guys who, is there an obvious replacement for him if things don't go how we hope they go with him? And I don't think there is one. So certainly important, and really excited to see how he embraces that role. Sounds like he was in contention for the gold jersey the second week. So that's a positive sign. I think we've heard Archie talk about a lot of things, with him. So hopefully that comes to fruition. I'm excited to see what he can become in a more focal role within the offense.
No question. You are listening to The Assembly Call. I'm Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms, breaking down the IU front court. We just talked about Juwan Morgan. Andy, we got a couple minutes left in this segment. Let's start with Geron Davis. And why don't you kick us off here with Geron for a couple minutes, and then we'll pick up the rest of it in the next segment.
Yeah, he was, fouls is kind of the word for him, both his ability to draw them and his ability to commit them. So he drew 6 fouls per 40 minutes and was called for 7 fouls per 40 minutes. And there was a good story about him on The Athletic today, talking about his weight loss. But one of the things they touched on in there was about the fouls. And he has not been shy about attributing that to his poor conditioning and just being, kind of, laziness and not able to really be where he needed to be there. And, they referenced that one, I think it was the Purdue game, where he committed like 3 fouls in 40 some seconds or whatever that number was. And so I think, that's a big one for him, because if he can continue to draw those fouls, again, really high free throw rate, up over 66, shot 75% overall from the line, or close to 76, and almost 81% in Big Ten games. So he's got to be able to do that. Now, the flip side of that is he's got to be able to finish through that contact around the basket, where he didn't shoot well on 2-pointers. I think you've got some other stats on that from Synergy, but, under 50% on 2s overall, and against tier A competition, under 40%. So that really not what you want to see. One of the things, and I usually, kind of throw some of these comparisons out, but I picked this one only because I hope it's one that comes to fruition. But John Collins from Wake Forest, last year ended up getting selected I think he went in the lottery of the draft, or pretty close there. I think he went to Atlanta. He was a guy who, had, I think, what was his freshman season compared to Geron's freshman season. So if you see similar progression, I think we'd all be happy with that, and him getting his way into those conversations. And, but like so many other guys, high turnover rate. So needs to get that fixed. But I think, again, good building blocks, but it's funny, you start to dig in a little bit, and some of the things that even we would have said were great about him, I don't know that the numbers show were as great as we thought. We just saw those glimpses of greatness that we all kind of hung on to, not unlike the Jeremiah April turnaround jump shot.
Wow. I did not think that we were going to get a Jeremiah April turnaround jump shot reference today, but there it was.
Even beat Greg Graham, so that was good.
Fantastic work, Bottoms. That's wonderful. Okay, so we're about coming up on this segment. You have in here in your notes, his offensive rebounding percentage being higher than his defensive rebounding percentage. Geron obviously needs to get better as a defensive rebounder, but he's got to keep that offensive rebounding percentage and his ability to score on those offensive rebounds, because he derived a lot of offense last year on putbacks, was actually in the 83rd percentile in doing so. And we will get to, some more of those numbers here coming up in our next segment. So stick with us here on the Assembly Call. We will continue breaking down Geron Davis, what he needs to do to take the next step, and then also talk about Collin Hartman and the rest of the guys. That's coming up. All right. That was right on the nose, 12:15.
All right.
Well done. Okay, so we'll hop in and do Geron. I put the I put a link to our notes in the YouTube chat so people can look at the numbers, because it's kind of dense just having to read out the numbers.
Yeah.
But hopefully we're doing a pretty good job of explaining it. How's it coming across? Would love for you guys on YouTube to let us know. I know it's not always easy to kind of explain numbers and then try and put them in context. So let us know if it's not quite hitting the right key for understanding
too much. Yeah, that's the hard part. Is, I mean, I could dive into some of this stuff and
I know.
Go on for a while, but it's, how do you hit the stuff that matters? But I think the synergy stuff has been interesting for some of these, because it
is
kind of like I said with Geron. I mean, I think we have this perception of he had some of those great games and moments and whatever, but then you also look at some of these stats and you're like, yeah, I do remember talking a lot about, him being able to finish through contact at the rim and missing some of those shots. I think a lot of that goes back to conditioning as well. But so we'll see. Yeah, I thought that article on The Athletic was good about him.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that was great. And by the way, people have asked, is The Athletic worth it since they don't have dedicated IU coverage? I think so. I think their coverage is really good. If you're interested at all in staying abreast of national college basketball trends, and even, Brendan Quinn, I mean, he's more focused on Michigan and Michigan State, but he's done some really good Big Ten preview stuff. So I think it's totally worth it myself.
Totally agree. And they've got enough good writers. I think that, they're in preview mode now through their top 25, and they've done some conference stuff from some different perspectives. But yeah, I've been pretty happy with that. I actually feel like I would like to read it more than I do, but I sometimes forget about it. But definitely got on there when I saw that about Geron. But I think it's I've enjoyed it. I've read some of the other, even the college football coverage and some of the pro sports coverage, depending on who you follow, that they have a pretty good depth on. So
all right, let's hop in segment 3. We'll go Geron, then Collin, and we'll just see what we have time for after
that. Yeah, probably Freddie would be the next.
I may have to hit Freddie in the next segment.
Next best one. Yep, that works.
All righty, so let me pull these up here. Okay, here we go. Okay, we're good. All right. You are listening to the Assembly Call. Go to assemblycall.com/join right now or whenever it's convenient to learn how to subscribe to our email newsletter. If you want to get more out of being an IU basketball fan, then you need to be on our newsletter list. You will get our weekly Six Banner Sunday news roundups, as well as our post-game analysis emails once the season begins. It is all free, and it will make you a smarter IU basketball fan. Again, the URL is assemblycall.com/join. I am Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms, my co-host on the Assembly Call IU postgame show, and we are previewing the IU Frontcourt. We began talking about Geron Davis in our last segment. We will pick that back up right now. So, Andy, my big takeaway looking at the synergy data about Geron is that he's got to stay active on the glass, and I mentioned that in the last segment, and he's got to get better in post-up situations. So, Geron graded out pretty well offensively. He was, a good classification offensively last year in the 60th percentile, and he derived a lot of that offense from putbacks. So he had 32 offensive putback opportunities, and he scored 1.3 points per possession, which is in the 83rd percentile. That's excellent. The issue is that he was only average in post-up situations. So in 101 possessions, he scored 0.77 points per possession, which was in the 46th percentile, and that's just average. Now, here's what I found really interesting. When you add in situations in which he passed out of a post-up, so you add that to those 101 possessions, his efficiency rises to 0.93 points per possession, which is in the 67th percentile. And so what that shows you is how adept he is at passing out of the post and finding the open man. And, Andy, I'm sure you recall many, many times last year talking about, what a great find Geron made, out of the post to a guy, for a 3-point shot or to a cutter. And so that really improves his efficiency. But I think for him to take the next step, he has got to score better in post-up situations on the block. And, obviously he had games, I think the Michigan game was one, where he came in and just started scoring bucket after bucket. But, in a lot of games, it felt like, because he played so low to the ground and didn't have great quickness, combined with kind of a low release on his shot at times, it really hurt his ability to get the ball up on the glass and to be able to finish in those situations. And so if the weight loss and the increased athleticism can help him have more stamina, be quicker, jump better, it really, along with just the experience and the improved footwork of being a sophomore, it should improve his ability in those post-up situations. And another thing to kind of watch is his numbers. He was much, much better and more comfortable on the left block than he was on the right block. And then my final note, Andy, about Geron when it comes to defense is, as with all the Hoosiers, he wasn't very good defensively overall last year, but he was actually pretty good around the basket and actually graded out as very good defending post-ups. Where he was really bad and was below average was defending spot-up shooters. And, think about how many times you saw a struggling, slow Geron Davis trying to recover, to a wide open shooter or trying to defend a pick and roll. Again, increased stamina, increased athleticism, hopefully will help him in that area really shore up a weakness. And if he can shore up that weakness and then get better in those post-up situations, that on offense, that breakout that everybody is expecting really could happen and really looks possible given what you expect him to be better at this year.
Yeah, I think it was funny. You kind of talk about the athleticism piece, and one of the other things in that in our continued unsolicited advertisement for The Athletic, they talked about how they've been having him go back and watch his tape from high school. So not unlike Ryan, they're really wanting to get their hands on that tape, but just to kind of go back and show him like how explosive he was and things like that, and he feels like he's getting back to that. And I think when you really start to think about some of those finishing and some of the post-ups and those things that might have been a struggle for him, you wonder how much of that is doesn't feel like a stretch to say that a lot of that could have been related to his conditioning and things like that. So I think that is going to serve him well on both ends of the floor because, again, he talked about how, just didn't have the stamina to really be where he needed to be defensively. And again, some of these guys who will just kind of wear you down and beat you up inside, doesn't take very long before you really get worn down and make poor decisions and things like that. So I think obviously it's great to see the weight loss and all those kinds of things. You want to see more how that actually manifests itself on the floor. But I think when you look at the deficiencies that you kind of called out that he had, those seem to be it doesn't feel like a stretch to say that the strides he's made physically will help with those. Nor does it seem like the things he's done physically will in any way detract from the things that he was already good at and that kind of foundation that was already there.
Yeah, and when he came in, he was a guy that was kind of known or I thought was expected to be able to step out and make, a 10-foot jumper, a 14-foot jumper, and we didn't really see that much last year. If he can add that to his repertoire as well, that will also help his offensive game. So we will see.
Yeah, and I think one of the things with him was last year we constantly had this conversation of like, can you play him and Thomas Bryant together? Is that really what's best for the team? Like, you don't have that argument anymore. There's really no other true big guy on the team. So whether we see him step out a little bit more, maybe. But I think
you play Geron and Priller together is the question.
Well, I kind of hope we don't have to find out, but yeah, I mean, I suppose you could if you had to. I mean,
unless Priller it's Purdue Tim Priller, and then he needs to play 40 minutes a game.
Well, absolutely. And if it's Northwestern Tim Priller, then he can come out and set 18 screens to get Geron free inside. So perhaps the answer to our question is yes, based on our recollections of Priller from those games.
Yes. And let's keep it positive to those games. Hey, look, he showed that he can be a guy in those games, a productive player for a few minutes. So hopefully we get more of that Tim Priller this year because he can be useful. I'm Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms. You are listening to the Assembly Call, and we are breaking down the IU front court. Andy, let's move on to Collin Hartman. And I have to say, he was the one looking up the numbers in synergy that surprised me the most. And the first question that came to my mind, and I wrote it down right here on our notes, is, are we underrating his impact? So listen to these numbers, because again, they really surprised me. Obviously, there aren't numbers from last year because he was hurt and didn't play, but you go back to 2015, 2016. And obviously that's a totally different context. That was a team with Yogi Ferrell, an offense that was just, beautiful and functioning at a really high level. Overall, his offense was good. He was in the 61st percentile in 193 possessions. And he actually struggled a bit more in the half court than he had in his previous season because of poor catch and shoot numbers. He was only in the 48th percentile as a catch and shoot guy. And, Collin is a guy that you expect to be able to make those opportunities and just didn't quite shoot as well. And obviously those numbers were dragged down toward the end of the year because of the wrist injury that he had. But he was really good in the half court. He was really good in ISO situations. He was really good in transition. And he rated out as a good defender. So that was Collin in 2015-16. Now think back to the 2014-15 season. I apologize for bringing up memories of that season, but just think about Collin specifically. He was rated as excellent in 142 offensive possessions, in the 95th percentile in terms of his scoring efficiency in those possessions. He was excellent as a shooter. He was excellent in transition, and he also rated out as very good defensively. And you'll remember, that was not a good defensive team. And so those last 2 years, where Collin has played on defensive teams that weren't that great, he rated individually as a good or very good defender. So to me, when you look at Collin's leadership, just from being a senior and being around and being in the different Big Ten arenas, what he can do in terms of spacing the floor if he gets that shooting touch back, and I think we all expect that he will, plus kind of the varied offensive game that he has. He can drive. He can go get rebounds and get putbacks. He can, do some things in transition and be a good ball mover in the half court. When you add that, plus his ability to defend for a team and a coach that really wants to make that a focus, I really do wonder if we're underrating his impact a little bit and if his impact will truly come through in the stat sheet anyway. And I know that's kind of a cliched thing to say about Collin Hartman because hashtag Collin Hartman things and all of that. But, I really think that when you kind of dig deeper in the numbers, beyond the box score numbers, it really does start to illuminate some of his value. And I think he can really play, we know he's going to play a key role, but I'm starting to think that his importance for this year's team is even greater than what I had been kind of anticipating.
Yeah, one of the things, I think this is one of the IDS articles that I read out of today, it was about, there was a lot of quotes in there with Archie talking about using Hartman to facilitate a little bit more because of that basketball IQ and, making the right reads and making the right decisions. Talked about putting him in more positions as a playmaker. And it was funny because I had, one of the notes I jotted down was around his assist rate, only 12% as a junior. Can he be more of a facilitator? Because the same, basketball IQ that comes into play there is the same thing that allowed him to be a good defender on just a god-awful defensive team. I remember in that 2014-15 season, we would come on after the show and be like, this is the only dude who looks like he has any idea where he's supposed to be defensively. And that,
I think Brian said that 50 times that season.
Yeah. I mean, also he stood out like a sore thumb because he literally was the only guy who knew where he was supposed to be. But
actually, he was the healed thumb. He was not the sore thumb in that metaphor
true.
or analogy.
But so I think some of those things like his understanding of the game, I think becomes really important there. And so if that's true, I do think he becomes more important because you still have probably some lingering point guard type questions. And while he's not a true point guard by any means, it sounds like you'll see times where he's, doing the right reads and that, kind of coach on the floor, all the other, cliches that you want to throw out there. But I do think that matters. I think if he can get back to shooting the way that he did, again, I mean, his 3-point percentage was pretty good in his junior year. It just, torpedoed when when he got hurt. So, I think that can be a positive. And he shot, even that year, he shot 57% on 2. So he was still a good shooter. And I think when we talk about floor spacing, he has to be a guy that's able to do that again on a team where don't have quite the depth of 3-point shooters as there was a year ago. So, he's going to have to wear a lot of different hats in the offense. But I think, like you said, I think when you start looking at some of it, probably could be underrating him. And part of that, I think, is that we just haven't seen how he's going to be used. We know how he was used in Tom Crean's system. And similarly, I doubt we'll see some of the JaJuan Morgan initiating offense type things. It feels like those things might fall more to Hartman, at least based on, my interpretation of what I read today.
But it is, it does start to get really interesting when you think about this team in the half court, having two forwards like Hartman and JaJuan. Obviously, they need to, improve their shooting over what they did the last time we saw them. We've covered that. But, their ability to drive, their ability to create, their ability to do a lot of different things in the half court gives this Indiana team a good amount of versatility, especially if you're surrounding Geron Davis and he improves his efficiency in the post. And if you can get, we all expect Robert Johnson to be pretty consistent. If you can get something from the point guards, be it Newkirk or Devontae Green, you've really got some flexibility in the half court and some interchangeable parts and different guys who can do different things that should make this team, not obviously like they were 2 years ago with Yogi leading the show, but can present some different looks and be difficult to guard for opposing defenses in different ways maybe than Indiana's been in the last few years.
Yeah, definitely different. I think that's one of the things as we start thinking ahead to, this weekend in the scrimmage, it's just, and we may not see Hartman, but starting to understand a little bit better, Archie's talked so much about roles and guys settling into those, but what does that actually look like on the court? So, I do think that'll be interesting. Hartman also did a really good job pulling off the red jacket today at the media day. So
yeah, how about that? And Robert Johnson with the purple.
Yeah.
The guys were looking good. They were looking dapper. You got to give them that. Yeah. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
All right, let's talk Freddie McSwain in this segment as well. And, look, Freddie is an interesting guy. Obviously, he's rough around the edges. But already, I think you mentioned this earlier, he was one of the 3 guys mentioned as being in the running for that gold jersey, along with Devontae Green, Juwan Morgan. Freddie McSwain was another guy that Archie mentioned. So let me give you these numbers on Freddie McSwain. Andy, you are not going to be surprised by these at all. All right. Freddie was excellent in putback opportunities last year. He was in the 83rd percentile, 1.31 points per possession in putback opportunities. Now, where he really struggled was he was below average as a cutter. So when he received the ball as a cutter, 0.91 points per possession, which was in the 20th percentile. And poor Freddie was 0% as a spot-up shooter. Now, that's just not his game. So I don't think you'll see Freddie shooting very much. And to his credit, I think a lot of those shots came, kind of in garbage time type situations. He's a guy who pretty much knew his role and didn't try and go outside of it. But I think
he was on a strict only shoot against SWAC and MEAC teams program. I believe I could be.
Yes. Or on, just beautiful, powerful follow-up dunks. So obviously for Freddie, he's got to build on what he did well last year, and that is being an offensive rebounding machine, being opportunistic, kind of a garbage man type on the offensive end. But we saw some growth from him toward the end of the year. You'd often see him, flash from the corner. Think back to some of those cuts Troy Williams often used to make, from the corner to the bucket along the baseline. And, he would be fed and dunk, and he was great at finishing. And Freddie would try and do some of those last year, but kind of had stone hands for a while and lose the ball, or if he got the ball, wasn't adept at finishing. We saw him get a little bit better at catching and finishing toward the end of last year. If that improvement continues, he improves his hands, he improves his balance, improves his awareness so that he can finish those cuts, and now he can be a guy who creates offense off of offensive rebounds and in cutting situations when the defenders kind of forget about him, because he'll obviously be, the 5th focus for the opposing defense when he's on the floor. Now he adds a little bit more value on the offensive end. And then where he obviously has to get better is defense. On a poor defensive team, he rated out as poor overall, and he was actually poor in every area except that he was good around the basket. And that is something important to build on, because with Indiana's, lack of depth down low, and obviously, some of the guys who are being counted on down low who have been injury concerns in the past, we may see Freddie getting pressed into action where he has to do a little bit of, AJ Moye type defense and defend guys bigger than him. So the fact that last year in limited time he was good around the basket, gives me some hope that he can defend in that way again this year. So, I don't, Freddie is obviously going to be a guy who's on the fringe of the rotation. I don't think you're going to see him playing more than, 6-8 minutes, maybe at most. But I think if he can get in there and really provide a spark with his energy and find ways to create offense in the ways that I mentioned, and then be a solid defender, he can carve out an important role on this team. And based on the comments from Archie Miller, it sounds like he's starting to do that in practice, which is really encouraging. What did you find about Freddie, and is there anything that I just said that surprises you?
No, I don't think any of it surprised me. I mean, he had the, albeit in fewer minutes, best offensive and defensive rebounding percentage on the team. Like Geron, though, fouls were a big problem. He averaged 9.1 fouls per 40 minutes in Big Ten games. So that becomes, for a guy who, you're going to need to try to steal minutes from, certainly going to need to cut down on that, because there will be games when people get in foul trouble. They're going to need a lot from him. I wouldn't be surprised to see him get 10 minutes a game if he can continue to do these things well, because I think he's the kind of guy that Archie is really going to like, as long as he can play defense. But I think just from a more rugged guy inside that's really going to hit the glass, and again, here's a specific role. You go out and do these things. Archie feels to me like he's treating these guys like each one of them, their game is like a tree, and he's trying to prune out the stuff that they're not good at and say, like, this is what you're going to go do. And I think he can do that with McSwain at this point and be able to get a lot out of him. And it sounds like he is already. So again, another guy who, good free throw rate, again, limited minutes. The turnover rate was atrocious, almost 30 against tier A teams. So, not unlike, he quickly adapted to the culture into which he was thrown in terms of turning the ball over and playing poor defense. So, but no, I honestly think he's going to be a really important guy for this team. And there'll be games that we look back at and really say, he came in and had, a great 8 minutes that really allowed IU to get rest and made some plays that eventually were the difference in a close game.
Yeah, I agree. All right, let's save Tim Priller for the next segment. We'll also talk about the new guys, Clifton Moore, Justin Smith, what they need to do to earn time. That is all coming up on the assembly call. Stick with us, and if we have any time at the end, then we will get to your questions as well. Before we wrap up, that's coming up next. All right, that was 1804.
All right.
So a solid long third segment again, which has become our custom. All right, so we have 5:54 left. That means we have 5:18. That was quick and easy. So we got to be out of here at 5:18.
Okay.
So let's hit these guys quickly, and then I can end with that anecdote about Romeo.
I was just, yeah, just end with that one. We don't need to hit other questions, I don't think.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good stuff. Yeah, we had Brian Tonsoni. Here's the surprise player this year, McSwain. I think he's going to – hey, he did some good things toward the end of last year. Like, he really improved. That was the thing about, like, Newkirk, like, those guys really got better as the season went along, which was nice to see, while other guys faded badly. But those guys got better.
Yeah, he's another one they've talked a lot about, like, physically what he's been able to do. I mean, he's already a good leaper, so I think that helps him from a rebounding standpoint. But, yeah, I think he's going to end up being really important and be one of the first guys off the bench. I wouldn't be surprised at all if he was a 10-minute a game guy.
Wow.
Maybe even more than that, depending on how it goes. I mean, part of that is dependent upon Geron, but he in some ways is probably you could view him as the primary backup for both he and JaJuan. I mean, obviously can't do the things that those guys can do, but
you really, but can you have, I mean, he's so limited offensively though. I mean, maybe.
Yeah, but if you have the other guys with him, I mean, under no circumstances is he going to be, like you said, when you were talking about it, I mean, he's going to be the fifth option in virtually every lineup scenario. So if you left Geron out there and you put him in for JaJuan or vice versa, yeah, obviously if you take both those guys out at the same time and he's subbing for one of them, then you're gonna struggle. But I think if you wanted to try to rotate those guys, I mean, maybe that's just because he's what we kind of know, at least at this point, and we don't know what Clifton Moore will be able to, kind of what he can handle on his plate, and what Smith, I guess on some level maybe you could view as a Morgan, a guy that could sub for Morgan. But I think I don't know. I think Archie strikes me as if I know what I can expect out of you, I'm going to give you a shot. And I think Freddie, because his offensive game is limited, you kind of know what to expect. But if you can get him to do the things that you really need him to do, I think he can be effective.
I think
kind of guy who you look at other teams and be like, hey, this guy has this role, and every good team kind of has a guy who can do some of the things that he'll hopefully be able to come and do.
Yeah, I think Moore is really important. I mean, he changes the ceiling of the team, depending on what he can do. And that's why I think this team is going to be a lot better in February and March. Because if he can kind of have the impact that like OG and JaJuan had their freshman year, where it's like, whoa, this is like a completely new dimension that just got added to the team, and maybe he bumps McSwain down in the rotation, once he kind of gets his sea legs. But I know that, I mean, that's going to be interesting to watch all year.
Yeah. Anyway,
we basically just did the fourth segment. Now we need to do it again.
Well done. It's good practice. I'm sure it'll be better, even better.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's just hit these guys quick. Obviously, we don't need to talk about Race Thompson because he's not going to play.
Yeah.
5:18. All right, here we go. Ready? Gotta get over this cold, man. All right. You are listening to the Assembly Call. I'm Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms, my trusty co-host on the Assembly Call IU postgame show. And Andy, let's wrap up our in-depth analysis of the front court, and let's talk about the guys that we haven't mentioned yet. Let's hit them quickly. Let's start with Tim Priller. Obviously, he enters his senior season. He's a guy who has not played a lot of minutes, but, we all remember fondly the minutes that he played last year against Northwestern when he came in and set some of the best screens that have been seen in Bloomington since Brian Sloan. And then against Purdue was a legitimate threat. And there was legitimate Priller mania there for a few minutes as he, single-handedly kind of brought Indiana back in that game. And I think cut it to 6 in the second half before Purdue reasserted their dominance last year and took off. But I think what we saw there was a glimpse of what a productive Tim Priller can be. And if he can be that guy in 3-4 minute stretches in certain games when, guys maybe have foul trouble or are dealing with fatigue or there's injuries, then I think he can really end his Indiana career, as less of kind of a sideshow and a guy that fans cheer for at the end of the game and more of a guy who really contributes to some important victories. And I think he's got that in him. And I think it's fair to expect that of him as a senior. And now it'll be interesting to see if he can do it.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is I don't disagree with anything you said, but in looking back, I mean, he played 7 meaningful minutes last year in those 2 games that you talked about, and he did play well. I think it was Ken Bykoff who sent the tweet out that he was going full Brian Sloan when he came in that Northwestern game, which was absurd. The screen, I don't know,
Ken.
Yeah, I don't know if in Synergy they have any kind of like screen related statistics, but that would be just off the charts in that. But yeah, I mean, I think, and Archie made comments about that in the offseason that he has to transition from I forget how he put it, but there was just, something of, you can't just be the, human victory cigar, and you need to be able to do more. So hopefully he'll be able to. I think it's, as you said, not unfair to expect that from him as we, move into his senior year.
All right, now, unfortunately, we only have a couple of minutes to talk about 2 guys who really hold a huge key for Indiana's season. I think these 2 freshmen, really, their development can change the ceiling of Indiana's season because they each bring something unique. Justin Smith brings explosive athletic ability. He's a mature player, I think, for a freshman, just in terms of his mentality. We will have to see, how he shoots, how he handles the ball, if he's ready to defend. But I think his athleticism and his physical maturity will get him on the court early. And then you have Clifton Moore, who, Archie was kind of, talking about how he's kind of like a guy on ice skates at times right now. But I think from everything you hear, it sounds like people have been more impressed than they thought they would be with where he is in terms of his game, his offensive versatility, kind of how quickly he's picking things up. And these 2 guys are guys to me that, like Juwan Morgan and OG Anunoby when they were freshmen, they may come along slow early, but if they can emerge in January and February and March and play big minutes, or not big minutes, but play more important roles, they can give Indiana a dimension that they won't otherwise have. And that can really change what this team is capable of and what kind of teams they're capable of beating. Clifton Moore, especially when you have a 6'10" guy who can step out and shoot and run the floor and do all the different things he can do. If he can get on the floor and stay there and be a productive defensive player as well. So, we don't know a lot. We don't have stats to go on, so there's not much to break down. But that doesn't mean that these guys aren't important and can't really change the trajectory of Indiana's season based on how they develop.
Yeah, I think Smith, I talked before about, not being a clear replacement for Juwan Morgan. I think Smith is as close as we've got to that at this point. And I think he, you think about some of the wing players in the Big Ten. If he's a guy who can come in and play good defense, that's his ticket to playing time. And for Moore, again, we all wonder what happens when Geron has to inevitably go out, whether this team ends up having to play really small or whether they have a capable replacement who can kind of give a different look based on what his skills are than what Geron would give. That's Clifton Moore is the tipping point in that part of the discussion.
No question. All right, to end, I want to relay this email from Assembly Call listener Justin Schaefer, who says, very interesting Twitter statistic that could be good fodder for the show. So here it is. So this morning, Romeo Langford tweeted IU official visit this weekend, and he has done that for all of his official visits so far, to Vandy, to UCLA, to North Carolina. So here are the comments, retweets, and likes for each of them. For Vandy, 71 comments, 89 retweets, 487 likes. For UCLA, 59 comments, 95 retweets, and 617 likes. For the North Carolina one, 90 comments, 224 retweets, and 1,000 likes. This Indiana tweet, 123 comments, 890 retweets, 3,375 likes. Obviously, there is one fan base that wants Romeo more than any other, or maybe just a fan base that's on Twitter more talking about basketball. Either way, Romeo, we know the choice that you should make come to Bloomington. All right, that will do it for us on this week's episode of the Assembly Call. If you want to see us do the show live and be part of the live chat, join us at assemblycall.com on Thursday nights for the live broadcast of our Assembly Call radio recording, or you can always subscribe to our podcast by searching for Assembly Call wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget, go to assemblycall.com/join to join our free email newsletter. Thank you for listening. We will be back to talk IU hoops again with you next week. Until then, keep your elbows in and your eyes on the rim. And go Hoosiers. All right. It's not like an NCAA violation for a podcast host to make a formal plea for a guy to commit to your school, right?
That feels legit. I mean, NCAA rules are a bit of a crapshoot in understanding them at this point. But
yeah, but you know what's funny? As I was saying that, I was like, wait a minute. I was like, are you sure? You sure you want to go there? Just make sure.
I think we're okay.
I think we're fine. Okay. I think we're fine.
Should be okay. No, those are good. It's been a fun couple weeks doing that. I don't really remember if we've done that in the past couple years as a way to like kind of preview the season, but I thought
that needs to be an annual thing.
Yeah, I honestly can't remember. It's entirely possible. Maybe not in this depth, but I don't really remember if we did that before or not. That's more a statement on my memory than it is on anything else. But
yeah,
but it was good.
All right. Quick programming note. We will. I know I mentioned this in passing at the start of the show, but we are going to do a show after the Hoosier Hysteria scrimmage. So we're going to have a special guest host. Andy is going to effort to make it there as well. So that's going to be fun. And then obviously we'll do shows for the exhibition games, and then we'll be rolling for the season, and we will continue doing our Thursday night show in perpetuity, I guess, until they tell us, until Kent tells us he no longer wants it. And even then we'll still be here doing our YouTube show. So, true. But hey, here's one thing. If you live in a market that has a radio station, and that would be all of you, because you all live in markets that have radio stations, and you think the assembly call would be a good fit on that station, like, and you want to do us a favor, you can email the station manager and let them know that you think the assembly call would be a good show. Because we're already doing all the production, and it's really easy for stations to download and play. We make it really simple. So we'd love to get the show on more radio stations and kind of spread the word and build the audience, and have more people here for the live chat, especially once the post game shows go, because then the live chats will really be hopping. So it's a great way to help grow the audience. So if you happen to know anybody who runs a radio station and you want to let them know, we would obviously appreciate it.
Doesn't even have to just be in Indiana. I mean, could truly be anywhere.
Yeah, Singapore or anywhere where they have radio.
Absolutely.
All right, that's it. That's all I got. You got anything else, Andy?
Only other thing that I thought was, I didn't realize the Big Ten did this. I knew they didn't do the another media day thing here. I knew they didn't do the like preseason poll. I know that Brendan Quinn did the unofficial one, kind of like picked up the mantle of that. Yeah. But what the hell is with the 10-man, like not even putting actual like first team, second team out? They just released like. Is that correct? Did I interpret that correctly when I saw it? They just released like
10 people on the first team.
The 10 dudes that are there.
You don't want to offend whoever's on the second team.
Yeah,
trigger warnings.
Yeah, apparently. I was like, I don't understand why the Big Ten is so in favor of like so caught up in that. Like literally every other conference releases one, because I've been trying to track it for like preseason projections and stuff like that. Like literally everyone like spells out who they are. Now there's some that'll do like a year and then like another 5, which is like almost as dumb. Where
well,
it ends
you
up having
yourself,
like 6
you
guys
pointed
on the first
out
team,
the errors in Jim Delaney's logic earlier tonight. So there you go.
Yeah. It's like, oh, these 10 guys, we don't hurt anybody's feelings. But they said what the 3 consensus ones were: Hap, Bridges, and Bryant McIntosh. Is that right? They were the 3 that were on everybody's.
Oh, was it McIntosh? Really? Wow.
I think it was. I think there was 3 that were consensus. I'm for the 3.
It wasn't Edwards or Mason?
No, Edwards.
Wagner?
I'm not even.
Wagner?
No, he was on it. He was on it for sure.
Huh.
I'll see if I can find this someplace, because it was. I never knew they did the 10 guys thing, which is just borderline absurd. But
hey, those of you who are still here, do you off of Andy's comment earlier, do you like the format of the last 2 shows? Do you like this format for doing the kind of the previewing it by backcourt and front court and going in depth on the players? Let us know if you like that. I mean, it was fun to do. It was definitely educational for me. Like it's really good context going into the season, kind of knowing that stuff and getting a reminder of what the guys have done in the past. So you have
definitely
good frame of reference for what they improve on.
Definitely good to look for as you start, wondering about where that is. Where is this at?
Cool. Lots of yeses. Awesome. Thank you, guys.
I know.
Yeah.
Here we go. Yeah. 10 standouts named to the preseason All Big Ten team. And I think they had unanimous selections where, Bridges, McIntosh, and Hap. The other guys that were there were Justin Jackson, Nate Mason, Wagner, Scotty Lindsey, Nick Ward, Vince Edwards, and Amir Coffey. So I think the guy, like people talked about Haas not being on there, I think was one that.
Did you say Nate Mason? Is he not on there?
Yeah, he's on there. Yeah, so two Minnesota guys,
2 Northwestern
2 Michigan
guys,
State guys, 2 Northwestern guys, and then 1 each from Maryland, Michigan, Purdue, and Wisconsin. So yeah, I guess, I mean, I don't know that a ton of stunners there, but I would have been curious to see who the other, 2 would have been on the first team if we weren't so afraid to hurt people's feelings. So.
Yeah. Well, and who will the Hoosier be? Because we know there's going to be a Hoosier on there. One of our guys is making it.
Yeah, I mean,
I think it's got to be Robert.
Yeah, I mean, maybe Geron. I would get. I don't know.
Or Juwan. I think it's going to be one of those three.
Yeah, one of those 3. Yeah, if somebody makes it, it'll be one of those 3. I can't see a scenario where it isn't.
Real bold statement we're making there.
Yeah, so we're going to take the 3 guys expected to shoulder load on offense, and if one's going to make it, it's absolutely going to be them. Yeah, way to take a stand. I mean, obviously, I would pick Robert Johnson, but
I say Robert. I mean, I think Indiana's going to finish in the top 6, and if they're going to do that, he's going to need to score some points. So, and I think he's going to play good defense.
Especially because in those things, they don't really care about. It's not an exercise of like, I'm actually forming a starting 5 that would form an actual like lineup basketball team. So there's no restrictions or thought given to like, I need a center, I need whatever. Although I would argue even with that, I mean, there weren't a ton of guards. I mean, it was what Mason and McIntosh were really the true. I guess Scotty Lindsey's more of a guard, but most of the other guys, they were more like wing guys or post players predominantly, if I'm thinking of this correctly.
Yeah.
So I already shut the window down that had the list, but yeah. So I don't know. We'll see. Hopefully multiple guys from IU make it, and that would make for a good season.
That would be awesome.
So all right, everybody. What are we gonna talk about next week? I guess we'll have the
I don't know, man.
Hysteria to talk about.
Yeah,
we got schedule stuff that we haven't talked a ton about. I know we got that's not a whole show by any means, but
yeah, we'll do some Hoosier Hysteria. Yeah, we'll see. And Ryan will be back, so you and I only need to prep about 5 minutes of material, and then
true. That'll be good. That'll be good. Yeah. I'm sure he'll have some hot takes on Italian sports, perhaps, so that he can
catch everybody up on what's happened in San Diego for the last 4 weeks. So tune in next week, everybody. Lots of IU basketball talk.
That's how to bring them in. That's got to give the people what they want.
That's right.
All right,
everybody. We'll talk to you next Thursday.
All right, see ya.